Hi everybody. Today I'm going to be talking about modern architecture. I'm going to be honest. Modern architecture is shit. Not gonna lie. And it's mainly because, there's lack of effort put into the design of buildings nowadays. Most buildings just look the same, generic, futuristic crap, What I consider like the peak of architecture, I'd say about the 1st to the 19th century. We can even go as far back as ancient Egypt even. They had great architecture, so did ancient Greece, so did ancient Mesopotamia. They had great architecture. Why did they have great architecture? Because lack of technology helped with, more creative designs for the buildings. What's the problem nowadays is there's too much technology, which causes more laziness on the designs of buildings, which is why most modern architecture is pretty much dog shit. Yeah. What else is shitty about modern architecture? There's lack of passion in the architecture. Like I said, generic crap. Reused crap. They like to reuse architectures from the past too much. You especially start noticing it around the 20th century, I'd say. So yeah. What else about architecture? Modern architecture that sucks. Well, despite the lack of effort and creativity, and looking the same. Let's see. It's just, I don't know how to describe it. It's dull. Yeah, I guess that's the best way to describe it. It's dull. It's not visually appealing. There's no visual appeal to the modern architecture because, it lacks the visuals that old architecture had. Like I gave you examples, ancient Egypt had the pyramids, ancient Greece had the, I don't know, Parthenon, whatever the fuck. Let's see. Mesopotamia had like those little villages and shit, which is pretty cool. And let's see. The first few centuries was kind of like more like, I don't know, it looked kind of like desert in a way. And then we got into the Middle Ages, and then we got into the Renaissance age, and then probably the Victorian age. After that, Roaring Twenties and all that stuff. Yeah, I'd say right around the early 20th century is when architecture really starts to suck. And it's mainly because they start borrowing too much heavily from the past centuries for architecture development. So that's why a lot of the architecture since then hasn't been that great, but I would say like you really start noticing architecture looking the same around the late 20th century, I guess. Yeah. Because, like I said, they start borrowing heavily from the past, which isn't good, because then it leads to a lack of creativity and a lack of innovative new ideas, which then causes shittier building designs. Yeah. Anyways, let's see what else is bad about modern architecture. Let's see. There's barely any art put into it. At least with the old architecture, you can kind of see the art in it. With new architecture, you cannot see any art in it. It's just dull, boring, and depressing. I mean, and that's also due to, I don't know, things just changing, I guess. What else about new architecture I don't like? Oof. Let's see. Buildings don't look the same anymore. Can't stress that enough. You know, buildings just look super lazy nowadays. Whereas back then they actually look more creative. You know, they actually had more ideas back then, that's why. But I mean, it led to more creative inventions of other buildings that would later define, you know, their eras basically, you know. And you know, I mean, it's been going through changes, buildings like every era basically. And I'm afraid in the future, like, building designs might get too futuristic. I mean, I already said this about like electric cars and stuff. Like, electric cars are pretty whack. They suck. They're shit. What else? Let's see. Modern architecture. Another point about it. Most buildings these days look the same. You can't really tell the difference. At least back then you could kind of tell the difference with buildings. Unlike nowadays, because most buildings are just, they almost look entirely the same. And you know, I feel like it's gonna be worse in the future when everything's futuristic and shit. Everything's gonna look like fucking Cyberpunk's 2077. Every building looking the same and shit. So yeah, it's gonna be worse than that though. Probably. Yeah. What else about modern architecture? What's other flaw about modern architecture? I guess there's barely any effort put into it with the modern architecture, whereas back then it took a lot more effort. Like the pyramid took like probably years, I'd say. And the Parthenon, I don't know if that's a Greece thing. It took probably decades too. Well, yeah, basically. I'd say the pyramid took like centuries even, or decades maybe. Or the Parthenon probably took years. You know, just because the equipment was different. What caused architecture to suck? I guess like everything becoming more and more, you know, technological and stuff. So they stop focusing on the aspect and the interior and exterior design of the building, which then causes the building to weaken over time faster than before, which then, you know, causes it to become brittle basically, which means it won't age well. And this is what I'm afraid most modern buildings, I would consider modern buildings like 20th century and up, I guess, are not going to age well compared to the 19th century and before, where they actually took more effort into the building designs because they didn't have like all that technology with forklifts and all that stuff. That didn't exist yet. They actually had to make it by like hand, basically, which cost, well, in a way it was cheaper though. Yeah, but I feel like most of those buildings made in like ancient Greece, ancient Mesopotamia, what else did I mention? Ancient Egypt, they'd probably be worth a lot today if they were built today. But back then they weren't worth a lot because the technology was very limited. So less people had access to those buildings. So yeah. In general, architecture has been going through a slum. Hopefully it picks itself back up. Only time will tell, really. Yeah, let me know what you think about modern architecture. Anyways, yeah, that's my little video on modern architecture. It could use some improvement. No, you can use Mega Improvement because it's shit. Anyways, peace.